This week, the American people have been able to see firsthand the waste and fraud that our taxpayer dollars have been used for. So what was the $68 million from USAID going to the World Economic Forum for? Well, here to unpack all of this is Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford. So, Bedford, tell us, what are we wasting our money on this time today, right? There's a news story every day now. Tell us what's the latest.
That's the thing, though. Waste, fraud, and abuse is so Tea Party 2000s. This isn't waste, fraud, and abuse. This is a machine that they've built. The shining city on the hill is actually a well-oiled machine in the swamp. And this is the entire left-wing edifice that they've built. And by the way, USAID is just a beginning. It is just one of many tumors on the system, but it is one that's in the glands. It's one that's spreading cancer through the bloodstream. It is funding left-wing organizations to millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, not just in the United States, but absolutely globally, in Ireland and Switzerland and France and Africa and Asia and South America, and of course, right here in Washington, D.C. They have built it's an ecosystem that we've discussed here before that is paid for by the federal government. It's paid for through lawsuits the feds actually get from different companies. It's also paid for with corporate donations, although those have finally begun to dry up in the last 6 months or so. And it creates this kind of feeling that, like you see in the World Economic Forum, like you see at Davos, this feeling that there is this massive and incredibly powerful edifice. And honestly, I knew that the money was always there. I always would giggle to myself when you'd hear that big moneyed interests are fighting against global warming science. Like, that's not true. There's trillions of dollars in global science, global warming hysteria, and thousands to hundreds of thousands and actually pushing back against it. What I didn't realize, and what is kind of being laid bare here, is that this Goliath is actually not as powerful and unbeatable as it at first seemed. You just have to cut off the money. And since so much of it is not actually funded by grassroots activism and people just sending in their $20 bills and $100 bills or donating or tithing, it's funded by the government. Well, it turns out you can just turn off the spigot and the whole thing dries up.
So well said. It's so true that what's being exposed now is not just waste. I love how you said that. It really is the structure of the system. It's unveiling. This is how this machine works. That's so true, and I think that's why it puts this over the top. It's not even about waste. So when it comes to cutting the spigot off, obviously the first thing is we just turn that dial. Elon presses delete or has one of his Zen boys do the same. That's great. We turn it off. What else do you think we should see in terms of investigations and accountability? Because I can't help but thinking, as our fellow host Steve Deace said, there's a lot of potential legal action here that could result when you start diving into this sea of madness.
Yeah, I think the legal action is one aspect, going after players who've committed fraud, which of course is dangerous. I mean, USAID is an arm of the CIA. It's just, you think of the CIA as this kind of covert, early Cold War organization, but a lot of what they're funding is just global liberalism. It's kind of weird and a real black pill for where our intelligence apparatus has gone. Unfortunately for the Trump administration, a lot of this is also going to need to be followed up legislatively. I mean, the left has been slow to respond. They have been scattered, they have been defunded, they have been demoralized. But they've been placing judges all for decades and decades and decades in Massachusetts, in Washington, D.C., California, and they're going to go to these federal judges and going to ask for these things to be stopped. I actually think, and I've got a piece coming out tomorrow on Beltway Brief about this, that they are shaking up the system enough to actually literally impact the real estate market here, to really impact the culture here, to actually change the trajectories of a whole lot of careers and kind of end this pat in the back system. But you need to keep that up for years in order to actually fix anything. And it honestly needs to be backed by legislative action. And Congress right now, with a very, very thin majority in the House of Representatives, and even actually a little bigger in the Senate, they can't even agree on tax cuts. They can't agree on funding the immigration agenda. They're a disaster. I mean, just today, talking to senior Capitol Hill staffers in the Senate and House, saying, what is this, one bill, two bill, three bills? They shrug, laugh, and say, well, what have you heard? It's because no one even knows who's actually in charge of the few things that are already on their plate. Forget about actually backing this up. I've got an interview with Hillsdale professor David Azarad that I filmed this afternoon in front of yours, Matt, for this show tomorrow, that he kind of lays out the dangers of live by the pen, die by the pen. I still think that this move fast and break things is actually exposing a huge amount, and this won't simply be undone like a couple of executive orders within the federal government. It'll be too hard. The damage will be too great. But you do need something to back it up with a combination of lawsuits and legislative action.
Sounds like a Dr. Seuss rhyme out there. One bill, two bill, three bills, four, right? Like, what are we going to do out there on Capitol Hill? You need to get them together. But Brandon Gill is a friend of the show. He's a Texas representative. I loved it because he had some thoughts on why Democrats aren't upset over the taxpayer dollars being used by USAID. Watch this.
It seems to me that leftists are apoplectic not because our tax dollars are being wasted on idiotic things, but because all of it is being exposed all of the sudden, which I think is certainly a beautiful thing. So much of this government waste has been operating in the shadows where the American people don't know about it and has been largely unaccounted for. And so many of these programs wouldn't exist and will not exist now that they're being exposed.
And one of our friends from North Carolina, Matt Van Swoel, took to X this morning and he was saying, I was a Democrat, but now that I see that the Democrats weren't outraged over what was happening in North Carolina, they weren't outraged by the wildfires in Los Angeles. They weren't holding press conferences every day saying, oh my gosh, you better go stop these crazy people that are doing these insane things. No, but now, Chris, now we're seeing press conferences all the time.
Absolutely. That's what they do. Just like you didn't see AOC crying down on the border during Joe Biden's administration, despite the border crisis being so much worse. Yeah, I'll be meeting with the congressman tomorrow morning to talk about the left-wing funding of media, and absolutely look forward to it because, he hit it right there. The problem that they're not concerned with the American citizen. They've made that extremely clear. They're concerned with foreign citizens. They're concerned with moneyed interests. They're concerned with accumulating power. They're concerned with NGOs. They're not concerned with the poor people down in North Carolina who had their lives ruined. They're barely even concerned with the people in the Palisades who had their lives destroyed. They're concerned with maintaining this machine, this apparatus, this control. That is why they're holding the press conferences. I mean, I'm just looking at this tweet right now from Eric Weinstein, the guy who was famous from The Big Short, talking about how this has finally exposed the managed reality that we've been living in, the scratch your back system that exists here, the $35 million over 5 years going to Politico Pro to write to the government about what the government's doing for the government, paid for by the government, and on the side breaking scoops, which are complete lies that are then repeated by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today. This is the managed reality we live in, the system that's been used of NGOs and nonprofits to also suppress people who are dissidents. This is a whole machine that's been uncovered. You've essentially pulled back the curtain, and you've seen the wizard, and he's right there, and he doesn't like that one bit.
Well, if you want your blood to boil for about 60 seconds, let's listen to Senator Eric Schmidt because he went on a rant exposing some of the government waste, and it is a doozy.
Because you can't really defend this kind of stuff. $45 million for diversity and inclusion scholarships in Burma. $3 million for girl-centered climate action in Brazil. $125 million to racialize public health. $288,000 for diverse birdwatcher groups. USAID, which is in the center of the storm right now, and rightfully so, spent $1.5 billion to, quote, advance diversity, equity, inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and business communities. $70,000 for the production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 billion for electric vehicles for Vietnam. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Columbia. Not Columbia, Missouri, or Columbia, South Carolina, the country of Colombia. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt. This is what they're mad about.
Listen, I know that when we have $36 trillion in our national debt, the millions aren't going to be the thing that really kill us. But, I mean, do we not even get a tape? Do we not even get the video posted on YouTube of the trans plays that are down there in Colombia? Like, we can't even see this with our own taxpayer-funded dollars, Chris?
No, I mean, it's important. It's even more important than the money spent, because it makes you realize that the American empire's major export for the last 20 plus years has been decline. It has been questioning your own values, questioning your religion, undermining the Christian faith, undermining marriage between men and women, undermining the sanctity of life, undermining sovereignty, undermining economies, undermining national determination. These are the things that the United States government has been exporting. It is a global revolution on the level of the KGB, but instead of actually having some kind of system that they want to create, they just have a system that they want to destroy. All of those things, they're not just stupid programs. They're all tied together, and they're all meant to make you lose faith in Ireland, lose faith in Serbia, lose faith in Burma, whatever city and whatever system, whatever family you come from. These systems are united in attacking and undermining those.
Yeah, you know, Chris, as we've discussed before on the show and off, I mean, this really reveals the religious nature of this thing, right? Because, as you said, all these things are united. How are they united? Well, they represent a certain set of, values and a value system that is, in fact, what we've been exporting. And I think that, again, goes to the anger right now because it's so obvious that it is a system. When we were growing up, there would always be these moments where Republicans would get up in arms, and you remember, I mean, it was like clockwork. How much we're paying? NASA's paying however much, thousands of dollars for toilet seats and that sort of thing. But that's not what this is. So, don't you think this is also a moment in which it exposes the substantial nature of the corruption, what it's actually about to the American people? And it appears so far like it's not just, I hope I'm not in a bubble, but I'm looking around all the media. It looks like a resounding, no, we don't want this anymore.
Yeah, I think that not only you can tell that people don't actually want this stuff, because these things won't happen without USAID and the Department of State and other aspects of the federal government that fund these sorts of things. These are artificial. They're astroturfed. It's not like the people, I mean, maybe they'll put together a trans opera or something in Western Europe, but that's not going to come out of the soil in Colombia on its own. You're not going to get these movements in Africa. They're not real. They're not of the people. The people don't want them. They think I think a lot of people probably think that they're stupid and don't recognize just how nefarious they are, that there's an actual goal here, that they're trying to hurt them. They just think, oh, well, that's stupid. I don't know why I spend my money on that. Let's get rid of that. Maybe some well-meaning, dumb college kid came up with it. And they don't realize what ties it all together. But hey, I'll be happy with them just simply not existing anymore.
You and me both, brother.